Happy Wednesday night and welcome to Deep in the Plus. This is the show where we go deep into the Disney Plus catalog and we find a movie or a TV show to talk about. And tonight we are talking about the fairest of them all. We're talking about the 1937 animated classic Snow White. Now, when we first started this show, part of what we started was to go in to the Disney Plus catalog like everyone did when this launched in November of 2019 and look at things and say, hey, this is something we would like to revisit. And I think a lot of people probably there's a lot of things you'd like to go revisit and you like that it's there, but you probably haven't gone back to. So we find these things and we hope that you guys enjoy talking about them again. Talking about this one, bringing on a good friend of ours, it's Stephanie. How are you, Stephanie?
Oh, I'm doing all right. How are you?
I am great. We're watching this thing I'm I'm in awe because this is like considered to be like the beginning of everything. It was called Walt's Folly. This is a movie that everybody said, why are you doing this? Cartoons are shorts. They're animated shorts. Why are you doing a full-length animated feature? And the more we dig into this and realize what a rarity this was, this moment in time,
Absolutely.
just like so many things that Walt Disney did, including Disneyland, all of these things. Just, I wonder, like, who's going to push the next frontier when it comes to this stuff? And it's just amazing to think of the things that he did to bring this thing to life back in 1937.
Yes.
I assume because you agreed to talk to me about this, you have an affinity for this movie as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she is the original. She is the first, she is the icon that everybody looks to for the Disney princess, truly. And it really came from Walt's own head and his own vision for this. So I found, in doing a little research for this episode, I found a documentary narrated by Angela Lansbury, of course, the incomparable, and it was called "Still the Fairest of Them All." And it took you, and it actually interviewed the real guys, all these men that were still alive, and they were able to talk about their experience with Walt, and took you through the whole entire making of the film. And something that I learned was that Walt, when he was a newsboy back in like 1916,
Right.
saw this is a silent film, the grim version of it, and he was like, that I need to do that.
Well, and all of the people that I've seen talk about it do talk about it in the same way and say that when they first, there's an extras that comes with this on Disney Plus, which is one of the things I love about Disney Plus, that they do some of the extras, but they don't do all of them, but they do some. And one of them was sort of a documentary, 30 minutes about the making of this. And one of the things that they said in this was that Walt gave the guys 50 cents to go across the street and have dinner. 50
Mhm.
cents. And he's like, we spent 35, we kept 15.
That's a lot back
And
then.
and then he said then they came back and Walt went through and explained to them, like,
Yes.
basically acted out the entire movie. And again, to your point, like, this was inside him, this was him, this was like he was more attached to this project than any that he had ever been attached to as far as movies go. And he had originally come to Hollywood to be a director. He couldn't break in there. He went into animation, and this was his foray to be able to bring animation into a full length feature. And I think that he probably had such passion for it. But hearing all of the
Yeah.
stories of how they said, how much is this going to cost? And he kind of just made up a number and said $200,000. And then it was $400,000. And then when it was done, it was $1.5 million in
Yes.
1937. And
Hmm.
then they brought the banker in and showed him some animatics and explained to him what was going on. And the guy's like, yeah, you're going to make a pile of money. Here's a check. Um,
Hmm.
and then all of
Amazing.
Hollywood the night before was like, this is Walt's Folly. This is a mistake. No one's going to do this. The colors are too bright to stare at that for 90 minutes. And then the
Yeah.
next day, apparently, he had everybody in Hollywood reaching back out to him and saying, hey, good job. Way to go. We were wrong.
He kept it very hush hush too. He didn't really want to tell people what he was doing when he was doing it. He wanted it to
Mhm.
be fully. immersive and fully like a surprise, really. And he kept even the actress and actors and everything under wraps too. He wouldn't let them go and do any kind of press or anything like that. So I think it was really, it was a labor of love for him. And like you said, he wasn't just the director or the animator, he was the storyteller, he was the actor that would get into those roles. I didn't know this until I had heard this on the documentary there, that Disney created the first storyboard. I didn't
Hmm.
realize that. That
Well,
this movie created the storyboard.
well, I was going to say a lot of what went into this was them, just like in Disneyland and Imagineers, this was them inventing things from the beginning, things that had never been done
Yes.
before. A lot of the behind the scenes I saw was, the having the director working through, well, like playing the musical score and trying to line it up with the scenes that were already in place, and that they brought in guys who were not traditional animators to give like the look and feel of the movie so that it felt like it was an actual European film with an
Exactly.
Americanized flair to it. And then there was a story, which I don't know if you heard this one or not too, is that that Walt put out a call and said if anybody can come up with a gag, because an animated short was pretty much just gag after gag, and I think
Yep.
in terms of animation it's like slapstick or falling over or an inside joke, so they generically call
Hmm.
them gags. Anybody that could come up with a gag that would fit into this would get $5.
Yes.
And then so there was a couple of them that said they came up with some stuff and got $5 to do it.
Hmm.
The movie went on to make a lot more, so I'm sure that Walt got more than his money's worth with it. But it made it a
True.
community, like a labor of love. When he started with
Yes.
animators, he had like 7 to 10. By the time this was over, there were like hundreds.
Yes. And they were happy to do it too. They were happy to, stay up all night, work on the weekends. They talked about that. They were like, we were so excited for this project. We wanted to do, he actually took his guys and they went back to school essentially because he had to
Yeah.
recreate. They'd never done humans before. So he had to be able to recreate that movement and that flow of the fabric and things like that. So they loved it. I don't know how much they slept, but I think they loved it.
Well, and you say that about humans, and also we talk about like the princess. The princess
Mhm.
is a Disney thing, the Disney princess, and she
Yes.
was the first one in 1937, and we didn't see another one until Cinderella in 1950, and
Yes.
then Sleeping Beauty in 1959, and then not another until Ariel in 1989. And so then after
Right.
that, it was like, well, this seems like a good idea. Let's pump out Belle and Jasmine and all the rest of them
Disney
that came
Renaissance.
after. But I mean,
Mhm.
we're in the teens now, but for what, a decade and a half, there was just Snow White, because after this they went into doing Pinocchio and Dumbo and Bambi
Yes.
and Fantasia, and so it was a little while before they did this again. But um
Mhm.
something, this is going to sound weird too, so something that occurred to me as I'm watching this is Saturday Night. Go with me on this thread now, Stephanie. Saturday Night
Okay.
Live turned 50 this year, and
Right.
there's a ton of documentary stuff about Saturday Night Live. One of the things that someone said, and I think it might have been Maya Rudolph in an interview, was talking about Eddie Murphy playing James Brown, and saying that he did James Brown's Celebrity Hot Tub, for those of you who don't
Mhm.
know. And what she said was that most of these impressions that people do becomes our memory of these people, because
Mm.
she was not around when James Brown was hot and doing his thing. And so her impression in her head of what James Brown is the impression that Eddie Murphy did. And I'm sure we see that. Harry Carey, I've never seen Harry Carey, but when I look at Will Ferrell's Harry Carey, I assume that's it. Like that's what we're looking at. So the reason that I bring this up, and again, thanks for sticking with me, is that when I'm watching this movie, the image I have in my head of Snow White isn't necessarily this. The
Mm.
way that this looks, the animation looks, this is definitely, I mean, it's definitely Snow White, right? And that makes
Mhm.
sense. But it's not the vibe that I have for Snow White, because we've seen her change in being added with other princesses, either in the parks or in uh, you know animation that's used for shows like Phantasmic or whatever, to the point where I feel like they all sort of blend together a little bit, like they do in this scene from Ralph Breaks the Internet, right? Like
Right?
she
Mhm.
fits in this world. Now you can see a little bit of a difference in, say, Pocahontas,
Mhm.
or
Right.
Cinderella, or even Jasmine, but I feel like they've all kind of sort of they've changed the imagery of it to the point where when I look at that image of Snow White, it's almost like hashtag not my Snow White, right? Like it's
Right.
that old school, like you said, they were learning to draw people, they were learning to draw humans
Mhm.
animation. Am I wrong? Am I way off on that, or do you feel like the same?
No, because I think a lot of us have grown up with the Disney princess, conglomerate, like, they put them all together and they all had a certain color and style of clothes that, they all went together, and it was marketing. It was marketing genius that came up with that. So, at least that's what my kids are used to. But I will say, so what you talked about, the animators looking like that European style for fairy tales, that was very common back then. That's what everybody kind of grew up reading. And so that was familiar to them. And yes, they were learning how to draw humans. And you can see that Snow White and even the prince, boy, they had a lot of trouble with the prince, apparently. And their noses are not very well defined, for one thing, especially in they did try it out first, which I didn't realize. So my daughter, my 2-year-old, loves the Silly Symphonies on Disney Plus. She will watch these on repeat, and I have watched, I can't even tell you how many times, the Old Mill, and oh, what was the other one? The one with the princess. Well, it's the spring, the goddess of spring, because it's kind of like the story of Persephone, wherever she goes down into Hades, has her, and he wants her to become his bride, but it looks like the devil. Do you know what I'm talking about? The goddess of spring. So this was done right before Snow White, and actually that's why they did it, was because they were trying out how to draw human form, and they drew her as a human and with her curls and the ringlets and things like this, but they made her hair a lot lighter, obviously. So I just found that interesting because I had watched these with my daughter and not even thinking it was any correlation to Snow White, but yes. And then they used the Old Mill for their multiplane camera to test that out before they actually did it for Snow White.
Yeah. I there's a very psychedelic scene with her when she's running through the woods and she feels like the
Mhm.
woods have come alive to her. Um,
Yes.
and this kind of has that sort of vibe to me when we like see the tree and then it's like, ah, like
Right.
that's that kind of that kind of has that feeling to it for me. But the Old Mill thing you were talking about,
Mhm.
that opening shot of the castle kind of felt like that to me,
Yes.
with the
Exactly.
clouds moving
Mhm.
in the background and we're using, I guess, the multiplane to go for, into it. That is when
Mhm.
I'm looking at going, man, this is a beautiful movie, especially again for defining the genre in 1937.
Mhm.
um
Exactly.
there's so many pieces of this that I went up, iconic, iconic,
Yeah.
all of like, and some of it is so because of seeing it again as parks fans. We see it in the parks, and we'll talk. What I want to do is I want to finish talking about this, then talk a little
Okay.
bit about the live action that's coming up and some of the other live actions, and then talk about the park inspirations from it. But I do think that a lot of those park inspirations are what, again, I have in my head as this is Snow
Yeah.
White. And so when she walks up to the mirror and is like kind of like looking like this, I'm just like, oh, that's just like, Snow White's Scary
Yes.
Adventures back in the day, which
Mhm.
is now Enchanted Wish, with her turning around and
Love it.
just, yeah, there's so many things that I just thought were very, again, like I said, iconic.
Iconic.
Before
Mhm.
we get into the movie part anymore, I know, I just take a drink. All right, play along. Before we
Oh,
get
no.
into the, I know. So before we get into the movie part of it, I do want to talk about one other thing that I think you touched on a little bit is the dwarfs,
Okay.
because I feel like, again, we'll talk about this with the live action that's coming up.
Mhm.
I have some questions about that, um, but in the original 1812 or 1912's Broadway play Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, they were called Blick, Flick, Glick, Pick, Cue, Snick, and Wick.
Yes.
And then
Great
and
name.
then in in one of these lists that I saw a guy like listing off all the ones that Walt had. He had like a list as if he was naming babies, right? He had a list of like,
Right.
these are my babies. Like you have those conversations with your husband. You're like, do we know a Gary? Is
Yeah,
Gary too big? Like we don't
exactly.
want it to be somebody we know. So,
Yes.
in the Julia Roberts version, Mirror Mirror, which again we'll talk about these later, is
Mhm.
Butcher, Chuckles, Grim, Grub, Half Pint, Napoleon, and Wolf.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
so anyway, they were going through the list of all of them that were there, and it just years later you look at it and you go, well, it just makes sense. Like these are obviously the ones that were meant to be, but at that time they didn't know what those were going to be, and they had a big,
Mhm.
heavy choice to make. So before we go a step further, and I know I usually ask trivia later in, I need to ask you. You've just watched this thing. Can you rattle off all seven dwarfs? I feel like you can.
Doc, happy, sleepy, sneezy, bashful, grumpy, dopey. Did I say sleepy? I can't remember now.
So you took Disney traditions. I took Disney traditions. I feel like that this is where I learned this. I knew all seven of them. I was the guy,
Mhm.
the know-it-all in Disney traditions, and they're like, "You are a dork," and that's Disney saying that. And so when I was doing it, I think that what they said is as a pneumatic or as a device to remember.
Okay.
Mnemonic device. I feel like
Mnemonic
is
device.
is what we're talking about here. Um, it's two S's, so it's sneezy and sleepy,
Mhm. Okay.
um, and then two D's, dopey and doc, and then happy,
Okay.
grumpy, bashful, three emotions. So it's sneezy, sleepy, dopey,
Ah.
doc, happy, grumpy, bashful. Is like it's ingrained in my head that like rattle them off. We did a radio tour once, and it was when the mine train opened up, and we got back on this charter bus, and the guy was like, "I'm gonna do some trivia. You can win this dopey plush. Who can name the seven dwarves?" And I went, "Dopey, Doc, Sneezy, Sleepy, Happy, Grumpy, Bashful. Give me my doll."
Sweet.
Um,
Are
again,
you kidding
yeah,
me?
exactly. So,
And that's what
um,
started the whole thing. The whole-
yeah, it all started with a dwarf. Um, No, no. And again, like this was never, I don't think, my favorite movie. I think that a lot of the stuff
Right.
when I was growing up was like the weird stuff, like the live action, like Escape to Witch Mountain, and the Cat from Outer Space and Condor Man and Tron, and just the weird live action stuff. And I don't think I really kind of got into the animation until probably like Oliver and Company, Fox and the Hound, Black
Yes.
Cauldron, that era, which was like arguably the worst era of Disney animation.
Fox in the House pretty
Um,
great.
yeah, I'm a fox. I'm a hound dog. Anyway, so I wanted to get into the dwarves because again, that's
Yeah.
such a big part of this movie. There's actually a scene where, and this movie's 83 minutes long.
Mhm.
The opening is pretty short. Like older movies, it has all of the credits at the beginning. It ends with and they lived happily ever after, and we're done. But the dwarves are a big part of this. I almost
Mhm.
feel like it goes dwarves, then Snow White, then the Queen, and then the Prince. Like as far as like
Mhm.
how much screen time they get, but there is a scene with Snow White when she gets into the cottage and they've come to grips with the fact that she's going to be there, and if she's going to cook, yeah, she can stay. Um, and they gather around the table, and she sends them off to wash their hands. That bit or gag about washing their hands takes
Mhm.
almost 8 minutes of an 83-minute movie. 8 minutes.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, like the rescue scene at the end is like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see like where their pacing happened. Like I don't feel like there's
Mhm.
ever a slow moment in this thing, and I think the songs are a big part of it and moving it along. But yeah, any thoughts on any of that before we move on?
Yeah, so Walt actually introduced them on one of his little promos or shows. Maybe it was prior to another movie, like a preview kind of thing. And he went through them and he said what their names are. He said their names are what they are. Doc, he said, called the self-appointed leader, and he was kind of pompous, which was interesting. And then he goes through and he says all the rest of them, and then he says bashful, who is secretly in love with Snow. I didn't know that. Did anybody know that? And I just thought that was interesting how he gave the little commentary on each one. But he did have all the animators, they had their ideas and they had a bunch of different names, and one of them was lazy, so I'm glad that they didn't go with that. But Walt had ideas about from the very beginning what he wanted with the songs, what he wanted with, like you're talking about, the pacing and the scenes. They actually cut out a big scene with them all sitting around the table. Yeah, with them sitting around the table eating the soup that she just made, and there was a full song that they had recorded and they were going to play, and Walt actually cut that because of the pacing. So that washing scene plus the soup scene together would have been a whole chunk of the movie. But I think that he was such a good storyteller. He knew that you can't have just the logical, you can't have, just the straight up and down storyline here, the love story. That's I think he said you have to have the pathos, right? You have to have the emotions, you have to bring people into it, they have to care about the characters, but you also have to laugh and you have to have that balance. And so I think that's why he did allow that to be a little bit longer for the kids. It's not just for the kids, I know, it's for the adults too. But it's a cute scene with the washing.
Yeah. As far as identifying them, though, when I'm looking at them, I feel like there are three that are very always identifiable, and that's Dopey,
Yes.
Doc, and Grumpy. I
Grumpy.
feel like
Yep.
the other four, I mean, Happy maybe because he's a little bit
Yeah.
heavier than the others, but like if you look right there at Sneezy and Sleepy, because of their eyes and they look so similar, um,
Hmm. And their
and
coloring.
yeah,
Hmm.
and Bashful. So I feel like Bashful, Sneezy, and Sleepy for sure are fairly generic. And then,
Hmm.
there are little things about them, which is great. But when you're animating a full length feature for the very first time, you don't know how to animate humans, and you're looking at seven different characters you have to create. That's
Hmm.
got to be a daunting task. One of the other things that I find interesting about the dwarves and all of the characters or all of the actors in general is that they focused on, when they were talking about this, they focused on the entire animation crew, but all of these people who were the voices were uncredited.
Yes. Well, even Snow White herself, Adriana, the name wrong, obviously, but is that what her first
Yeah,
name is?
Adriana
Adrian.
Caselotti.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but I'm looking, like when you look at it in IMDb, they're all listed as uncredited, all of them, because they go
Yes.
through the credits at the beginning and they show you everybody who was a part of it, but they don't show you which is interesting to me to say that maybe leading up to this point, all animation, it didn't matter who the voices were or who it
Right.
was. You probably just got whoever to do it. I mean, this was back in the
Hmm.
day when you had like Jimmy McDonald doing Mickey Mouse and 82 other people and sound effects and all that kind of stuff. So he's
Exactly.
literally the only name that he and Clarence Nash Jr. the only names I recognize out of
Hmm.
this cast, which normally when we're talking about a Disney Plus movie and we're doing it on Deep in the Plus, we talk about the cast and what they meant to us and what else they were in.
Yeah.
But when I look at this, I think of it the same way that when my daughter, I had to explain to her who Dick Van Dyke was.
Oh man. Oh gosh. The Dick
Well,
Van Dyke Show, one of my favorites.
even if, I was about to say, even if you know him from Mary, and there's a Dick Van Dyke Show was a huge deal and was on forever, but at this day and age, you don't just happen upon that anymore like we used to
Right.
back in the day. So I look at this and I'm like, maybe my dad would have known some of these people, but most of
Yeah.
them, I don't know. It's just interesting to me that the cast was not the focus. It was the
No,
animation.
no, and Adriana, I mean, if we get into her history a little bit, she didn't really go on to do much else because she had this contract that said you're not allowed to have any sort of like you're saying, they have to have uncredited roles in the future, and then that didn't help her, with her career. But the thing was, she doesn't. According to her, she did not ever intend to be an actress. She actually grew up as an opera singer, and her mother and her sister were also opera singers. Her dad was the voice coach, which is how she got the job in the first place with Walt, because he called him and said, "I need an operatic kind of voice for this role," and she was on the phone listening, and she said, "Can that be me?" And she was 20 at the time, so, or close to it. And so yeah, so she really didn't intend to be an actress from this, but she always loved reprising the role of Snow. I think that she really found that great honor in that.
Yeah. No, I agree. So again, this is based on the 1812 German fairy tale, The Brothers Grimm. We know that Walt, as a newsie, got to see it, was enamored by it. It was the thing that he wanted to bring up to be the first full-length animated feature. And the fact that he put the entire risk of the company on it. If this had failed,
Gosh.
there wouldn't be all of the things that happen. But
Hmm.
because it succeeded, it was like the
It's a
foundation of what
catalyst.
became
Hmm.
the Disney company. And so
Exactly.
I feel like we probably don't give this movie enough praise for that.
True.
Because again, it's 1937. You don't usually pull up a lot of 1937 movies to show to the kids. So I mean,
Right.
it's like you almost want to sit down and go, look, you're gonna appreciate this movie, and you're gonna love it. It's actually my son's favorite princess, but maybe he's just into
Oh,
to brunettes. I don't know.
maybe
Um,
hair as
but
black as ebony.
yes, exactly. I've probably only seen this a handful of times, this movie, but because
Mhm.
of all the clips and like I said, it's been part of Fantasmic, Happily, like a whole bunch of things in the
Yes.
parks. I worked at the Disney store and the Whistle While You Work. You remember the Disney sing along
Hmm.
videos that were out
Oh, yes.
probably when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Those that video would play on a loop at the Disney store on those big screens above Plush
Yes.
Mountain, and so like when that would come, and she's like, "And I'll get the broom," like all of that was
Hmm.
the lead up to it, and so I like immediately like flash back to that and thought, okay, that's iconic. Um,
Yes. Well,
yeah,
can I just
there's
say into
sure,
his creation of this, it started the tradition of changing the original fairy tale. Because the original fairy tale, again, go back to the Brothers Grimm version in 1800s, German fairy tale. It was pretty grim, if I can say that, a bad pun, because it wasn't just that Snow White. Now he kept a little bit of it, the horror in the sense that the queen wanted the heart of Snow White in his version. But in the original version, she wanted the liver and the lungs of Snow White so she could eat them with salt. Isn't that gross? And then
yes,
at the end, the prince ends up punishing the queen in one version of the Grimm fairy tale, where he makes her dance at his wedding, his and Snow White's wedding, in red hot slippers till she dies. So I think Walt's version of this was much better and much more palatable than what the Grimm brothers, originally intended.
yeah. No, I agree. I can definitely see that. And when I think about like the original Little Mermaid, I mean, doesn't she die and turn
Hmm.
to sea foam or
Yes,
something like that? So yeah,
exactly. Mhm.
yeah,
She doesn't
definitely
get the
things
prince.
are swayed for Disney advantage. So again,
Yes.
very iconic scene, her holding the box,
Mhm.
which you just happen to have a box laying around that's designed to hold a stabbed heart.
With a
Like,
dagger, yes. Through the heart.
yeah, that's so weird. Um,
Mhm.
and then also, the scene where she turns into the hag also feels like a very sort of iconic scene.
Yes.
Where she drinks the poison and then we kind of spin around. And again, those like camera angles for
Right.
1937 for an animated movie were kind of amazing.
I was actually
Um,
going to say that this is my favorite. If I were to pick one scene from the entire movie, this is my favorite because of that camera. Look at this. Because of that motion. I don't know. I just love that. That is my favorite part.
yeah. Well, and again, I feel like we've seen it a bunch because we see it in some of the shows. The other thing that is, of course, again, a very iconic scene is back at the cabin or the cottage where they're doing this dance around thing.
Mhm.
And of course, that's become part
Seven
of
Dwarfs Mine Train.
the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, exactly. But the animation in general is, it's very basic, and some of the things feel like they're cheated a little bit. But in general, the animation is pretty amazing. The effects that they do when it comes to like the smoke coming off of the kettle over the fire in
Right.
the kitchen, or
Mhm.
when the witch comes out of the fog, those
Mhm.
like effects for again 1937 are just insane for it, and like clearly look like they've stood the test of time.
Yes, and they were very meticulous with it and how the shadowing when she walked into the room, the darkened room with her candle, like where did the shadow fall? Does it look realistic? It has to be believable. So, yeah, I thought excellent job. It does stand the test of time for sure.
The opening trope. I mean, this is obviously the first movie that ever opened up with the book. So you see it open up with the storybook, and then we have to read. We have to read the pages. We don't have the narration. And
No
again, thinking
narrator.
back to like Beauty and the Beast, we just reviewed a couple weeks ago. That in that one, you have David Ogden Stiers, who plays Cogsworth later, is the opening narrator and tells you this is what's happened to lead to this. And so in this one, you actually have to read it, and it's written like in sort of an old English,
Like a King James script or something.
yeah. So I
Font.
mean, yeah. So and I wonder what the mindset was of like, why are the S's red and the M's are upside down
Mm.
P or upside down W's, and but
Mhm.
then the S under stepmother is not. I mean, it's like it's so random, but it must have meant something to somebody, I feel like.
Oh,
But
sure.
even with this, we have this at the beginning, and then we start at, again, I'm jumping around as far as the story goes because we all know the story. I feel like this is a 1937 movie. It's been an appropriate amount of time. Our mission here is to discuss it and maybe convince you to go back and watch it, not to
Right.
spoil a 1937 movie for you. But in this one, when we have this intro and then it kicks off, there is a point right near the end after she has taken a bite of the apple where they come back to it. But instead of going to the story pages, they just print it over the picture and say, okay, here's what happened next. Here's what was going on. And then,
Mhm.
they wrap it up pretty quickly. But again, they spent 8 minutes on a hand washing scene, and they fly through that with like a couple of scenes of text. It's kind of crazy.
Mhm. Mhm.
Another iconic scene to me, again, basically because of the attraction, is this scene
Mm.
here where she's trying
Yes.
to leverage that boulder and throw it down on them, because that was what happened at the end of the Scary Adventures. Like,
I
oh
really miss
no,
that too. Is the boulder gonna come down on top of me as I drive underneath it, you know? I
yeah,
really I miss that.
yeah, no, same. Um, so then, this movie, the animation, amazing, ahead of its time. Obviously, they worked so hard on it. It cost 1.5 million at the time. It's been released and re-released and re-released to the theaters, to the point where it's made 418 million dollars. And if you adjusted it for inflation, it would be one of the top 10 performers in North American box office at $2,297 million, and then for that's adjusted, I think, for worldwide, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, for
That's
worldwide.
amazing. And that's probably not even counting the merch. This is the first movie to have merch that was released with it.
Oh, Walt, what folly? What folly? There's no folly. Let's turn to talk about the music for a second, because the funny thing to me about
Mhm.
the music, first of all, is that I think it took me until I was maybe today years old when I figured out that she speaks in verse, and
Yes.
and it's
In
there are
rhyme.
there are several movies that when I've looked at them as an adult, I go, wait a minute, are they speaking in verse?
Yeah.
And so like I'm like, and
She
it's
doesn't
weird because,
always though. She does for the most part, but there are a couple of times when she doesn't, and it sounds weird because she's not.
well, I wondered if it was because maybe we weren't catching the whatever word it was supposed to rhyme with, because they
Oh.
they break it up. In
Mhm.
the words of Mike Myers, they put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Syllable.
Um, so maybe that was the case, but yeah. So
Brian Regan.
the verse thing, the verse thing was kind of crazy. But the overture is very cool at the beginning. It like it drew my attention that it was the overture, which you usually only see
Mhm.
in musicals. The I'm Wishing and the one song, I didn't realize that was one song. So there's I'm
Oh.
Wishing and then there's
Mhm.
one song. So that all
Yes.
happens. And then the same thing with Hi Ho is that because it sounds to me like there's a dig song. We dig, dig, dig,
Mhm.
dig, and the Hi Ho is different.
Yeah.
It's off to work we go, because they feel like different songs, but it's the same one.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, kind of a
So
continual.
um, with a smile and a song that she sings, and then there's Whistle While You Work. One of the people that I was watching on one of these documentaries was saying that like he can't remember any movie that had so many classic songs out of one movie. And I guess if you
Seriously.
think about that, I mean, Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid have to be close because I mean, there's Kiss the Girl and there's Under the Sea and
Hmm.
Part of Your World. But yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about Hi Ho, Whistle While You Work, I'm Wishing, Someday My
Hmm.
Prince Will Come. It's like the hits. It's like they're playing
Yep.
the hits, Stephanie.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how many of these Walt came up with himself because he did have some of these already in mind when he storyboarded for the first time. But yeah, I mean, the majority of them, I think, were probably during production they came up with the lyrics are so easy to remember because I think they're so catchy and they're so easy for kids to gravitate to as well. So I don't know. I think you're right. It's iconic, if I can say that again.
There you go. Yeah. So, and again, I think in general, like music on point, animation
Mhm.
ahead of its time. The voice acting, it didn't seem cheesy. There were a couple of scenes in it where it's like the scene where the huntsman is there and then he tells her to run. She's
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there was a little bit of that. And again, I guess that's them playing with the
Mhm.
animation, but for
No, that was how
1937,
Greta, what's her name? I can't think of her last name, but she and so they copied how she moved and how she did because yes, this little and she walks over and she's always doing this with her hands and everything. She watched the recordings of her and they copied that. And then Adriana, she was so much older. Some people are speculating that she was actually imitating Betty Boop, who actually one of the guy that animated was it Rawlings? That was his last name. But he animated Snow, actually animated Betty Boop. And she was meant to look a little bit more like her initially. And they thought, no, that's too sexy looking. Like she needs to look more innocent. And they changed the look of her. But the sound, Adriana's voice, like when she talks, you can kind of say, why is it so high? And it could be because Betty Boop was so popular and she sort of, you know, took on that persona.
yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, there was a lot of things in it that I felt like were sort of Easter eggs. The fact that one of them says Jiminy Crickets twice or three
Yeah.
times, but I mean, it's like prelude to
Yeah.
Pinocchio, right? But yeah, and I feel like there was some other saying that happened in the movie that I listed. Um, off with it, off with its head,
Oh.
and because they were when they were breaking back into their when they were coming back to their cottage and they realized somebody had broken into it, they said off with its head as if like there's a
Mhm.
monster there, but the way they said
Mhm.
it sounded very much like the Queen of Hearts says it in
That's good.
later
And Alice.
in Alice. Yeah. So
Mhm.
I mean, obviously not, but like that's where my head goes is like, oh, look at that, it's an homage to that. um One of the scenes that I thought was really powerful is that when the old hag is making, um, she's in the house and she plays it brilliantly. Like it's the perfect villain. Like she's like, oh,
Mhm.
all these animals know what's going on. Let me get into the house. But even though you've
Right.
been told not to let anybody in the house, let me get in the house. And she's like, well, of course, because I'm nice and you need help. And so if the prince from Beauty and the Beast had done that, we wouldn't have a movie because he would have
Right.
welcomed in the enchantress and she would have
It
been
would have been
fine.
done.
Yeah. But I think that whole scene is played very well, where it's like she's
Mhm.
giving her a wishing apple, and she's like,
Mhm.
and again, very iconic
'Cause
when
she had
she's
heard her
handing it, and she
singing.
goes, yeah, and she
Mhm.
goes, make a wish and take a bite, and like moves it up, like that's
Mhm.
very like ingrained. But the way they shoot this scene, where you see her getting excited, and then you see her eat
Yes.
it, and then we don't see her die or fall asleep, but we
No.
see just the apple roll off to the side
Mhm.
and then just
Mhm.
her hand there, like that, it happens off screen. Again, the thought process behind that in 1937
Yeah.
was just
Well,
perfect.
it was, and it was very dramatic. It had that, like we talked about, that pathos, right? It had that emotional tie, like you really cared about that character, what is happening to her, and you didn't have to see her choke and gag and do all this to understand what was happening, because you saw the witch and how gleeful she was as she watched Snow White take her final breath or whatever. But yeah, I wonder too, because it was during the time of the Hollywood Code, like maybe there was something to that, like this is a children's movie and we don't need to show a lot of gratuitous violence or something. But then you
Mhm.
do kind of see her fall off the cliff, so I don't know. Maybe that was not you know
A couple controversial things have come to light about this movie in recent
Mhm.
years. One of them is the idea of the wicked stepmother. And it
Mm.
never occurred to me that there are actual nice stepmothers out there who were offended by this stereotype. Not
Sure.
that it didn't occur to me that there were nice ones. It never occurred to me that they'd be offended by this stereotype,
Okay.
but it is a stereotype nonetheless that they have the wicked stepmother. And if we think about,
Mhm.
the queen in this one, and we think about the one in
Cinderella.
Cinderella,
Mhm.
that like that's a thing, and that really kind of came to light somewhere around 2019, I feel like.
Hmm.
The other thing that sort of came to light was this a kiss without her consent. Like that
Okay,
was
now wait a minute.
such a big
Let me
deal.
let me talk about this just for a second. Okay, look. In the opening scene, or one of the opening scenes, when she's talking at the wishing well and she's talking to the birds, they're talking to the doves that are there. I'm assuming they're doves, they're all white. And so she sings into the well and it echoes back to her and it says, "Your wish will come true." And that is when he scales the, I don't know, 4-foot wall. It doesn't seem like it's very, strong to surround a castle, but okay, whatever. So he's royalty himself. Maybe he got in already, but he scales this wall and he comes up to her, yes, and then he says, "Don't be frightened," and she immediately flees into the castle, shuts the door. But then she goes upstairs and she listens to him as he serenades her, and she falls in love with him, and she takes a dove and she kisses the dove on the beak, and the dove then flies down, lights on his finger, blushes, the dove blushes, and then pecks him on the mouth, and he has this big smile and goes away. So I think that is Snow White giving her consent right there, because she was the one that kissed the dove that then kissed him.
Okay, I mean, again, like there's a lot of it that there's a lot of stuff, and I mentioned this before in the Rankin and Bass stuff that we used to watch as kids, which was Rudolph and Frosty and Santa Claus is Coming to Town and all those. In the original Santa Claus is Coming to Town, where it's like the origin of Kris Kringle, there's a piece of it where he comes to town to bring the toys to the kids, and he says, "If you sit on my lap today, a kiss a toy is the price you'll pay." And I just am like, why did we
Cringe.
not see that? And when that happened,
Yeah.
like, why did we not? And then so like that to me seems like a problem,
Hmm.
because what are we doing? But with this one, it didn't seem like a problem. But it all kind of came around with the attraction, the Enchanted Wish, when they changed Scary Adventures to Enchanted Wish at Disneyland, because they put in that as a full scene with her, and they're like, why are we still doing this? But
No, it's ridiculous too, because he thinks that she's dead. So it's sort of him saying goodbye to her. It's not that he's trying to have his way or whatnot. But again, they had met before. They had already fallen in love. And
yeah.
he is saying goodbye to her and just happens to wake her up with the kiss.
Well, after that scene you were talking about, they pan back up to the castle window in another iconic scene that is straight out of the
Oh.
attraction at Disneyland, with
Hmm.
her like opening the curtain. If you
Yes.
stand in Peter Pan at Disneyland for long enough, you see this like 900 times with her opening up the curtain and then
Yes.
closing it, and then opening up the curtain and closing it.
So good.
Yeah, so that's definitely a thing. One last thing about the kiss though, that took me by surprise when I was watching this, is that the kiss is the antidote and to the poison that she's giving, the poison apple, which again, iconic, that poison apple when you pull it out and
Hmm.
it's like, okay. And the fact that she references that it shows on the outside what it is on the inside, death.
Yes. Hmm.
That's like so poetic. So then she looks up, she's like, wait, there's got to be an antidote, I'm sure, let me figure that out. And so she goes and looks it up, and it says, not true love's kiss, which we hear constantly in Once Upon a Time when that we reviewed. True love's kiss, true love's kiss, true. It's always true love's kiss.
First
It
love.
is
First kiss.
love's first kiss.
Yes.
But didn't he like kiss her at the well?
Mm. No, he didn't. It was the dove. The
It was the
dove
dove.
came down and was the intermediary. So maybe that's why it still worked. I don't know. But this was something of Disney's own creation, and I'm not sure exactly who it was, if it was Walt himself. But in the Grimm fairy tale, this was not a thing. In fact, whenever she's going, the old hag, the witch, is going to poison Snow White. First, she tries a corset to poison her, and she gets it on her, and then the dwarves come and they unlace it and she survives. Then the second time she comes, it's a poison comb, and she puts it in her hair, and then the dwarves take it away. And then the third time it's the apple. But here's the thing: the witch actually slices the apple. The poison is the red part, and she takes the white part, which isn't poisonous, to prove to Snow White, I can eat it too. And then
Hmm.
Snow takes that. So in the Grimm fairy tale version, she gets it lodged in her throat. She doesn't actually have a kiss to wake her up at the end. It's dislodging of the apple that wakes her up.
Wow. Again, we thought we knew things, right? They always say that about like misheard lyrics, the lyric you think you know versus the actual
Hmm.
line. Um,
Hmm.
Weird to me that she keeps referring to herself as Granny, by the way, when she's in the hag
Mm.
form. Because
Hmm.
again, I mean, if you think we're smack talking wicked stepmothers, grannies are getting a bad rap here too, right?
True.
So
Yeah.
that's definitely a thing. So so there's the kiss at the end, and then she wakes up, and I did think it was interesting and a little bit dark, where again there's narration at the end, not narration, but there's the text
Hmm.
that they have, and it's this text right here that said, "So beautiful even in death that the dwarves could not find it in their hearts to bury her."
Ah, do you know why? Because earlier the queen says she will be buried alive. Ha 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 ha. And because of that, the dwarves kind of thwarted her plan, because her plan was to kill Snow White with this sleeping death by being buried alive, essentially.
Yeah.
That's even more gruesome.
Yeah, no, I agree. But then she's in this glass box, but for some reason I don't know how long she's in this glass box, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that they hadn't they hadn't patented the embalming process at this point. So
No,
I
they
mean,
didn't know CPR either.
yes, she's still alive. They're not feeding her, but she's still everything's fine. Anyway,
Hmm.
so that's a thing that's happening there. Let me ask you this: Is Snow her first name and White her last name? I know that
Mm,
it's a moniker because of the color of her skin, but they call
yes.
her Snow White. Is Snow her first name and White her last name?
I think it's like John Marshall or Evie May, or one of these things where you name your child two names as their first name. And in royalty, if we're really going back to British royalty, like William and
They
Harry,
didn't have
they
last
have like
names.
a ton. No, they don't have last names. They have a ton of first names, just all down the road, because it is all about historical reference and things.
I was watching something recently on a trivia podcast, and they were calling him the Snow Prince, and her
Yes.
Snow White. And so
Yes.
because he's not really, he's just the prince, and then you
Yep.
have Snow White, and then you have the
Snow
evil
Queen.
queen.
We call it, well, in Disney character, we call her Snow Queen.
Snow Queen. Okay.
Hmm.
So that's just very strange to me, the naming mechanisms there. But he comes, he kisses her, everything's great, everybody's happy. He carries her away like a prize. No, I'm just kidding. He carries her away. He puts her up on the horse, like, well, I guess she's
Yes.
coming with me. And then he's like, oh, let me grab these little men for you to kiss on the head. Let me pick this one up. Now I'm gonna pick this one up. You can kiss him. Yeah, all
I
right.
mean, and
Now,
they had just chased the evil hag off the cliff and killed her with a giant boulder and done all this stuff for Snow, and then
I
all
know,
she
but
does
it's
is just
just
say bye.
It's yeah, right. But it's just so funny. And then that thing that she does where she takes Dopey's ears and she goes,
Yes.
like you're
Yeah.
not getting one on the lips, boy. You keep wanting one on the lips, but you're not getting one on the lips, boy.
Yes.
Um, and then they ride off into the weirdest sunset I think I've ever seen. With there's like
Castle in the sky.
the castle that appears in the sky, there it
Mhm.
is. Like, and I'm just like, where is that? How are they getting there? Are they both? Is this like a lost thing, and they're both actually dead, and they're like, that's like where they're
That's a
going,
fan
or is
theory.
this?
That's a fan
Is
theory
there?
actually, that she actually died, and that's why, that's like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think that it's just one of those, again, like a European storybook, a fairy tale, and that's how they would draw it at the end, and it would be like the ultimate, prize or something, the
Yeah.
ultimate ending.
All right. Well, did you know that this is our 250th review?
Yay! I wish I had
Yeah,
some confetti like Desi does.
I know it's crazy, right? We're very humble about our anniversaries, but I did want to just identify that this was our 250th
That's
review on Deep in
amazing.
the Plus. We started the day that Disney Plus launched on November 19th
Wow.
or November 12th, 2019. And then we've been going pretty much nonstop. We stop, basically for the holidays because nobody's going to be, maybe dialing us up or whatever. But there are 250 reviews with this one. You can check them all out at deepintheplus.com. But now, if you give us a thumbs up, it helps people to find us. Tell a friend. But here I want to ask you a couple quick questions for trivia before we move on to some of the final thoughts here. I feel like you should get some of these, and maybe you won't. But this has become what I feel like is a fun part of Deep in the Plus, and what others may think is torture. But
Yeah.
so
Anxiety.
it's fine. It's fine. You're not getting judged on this. It's just if you don't answer them correctly, then you hate Snow White. Um,
No. Amy, I'm sorry.
so the first question is um, that the huntsman, which again, Snow White, huntsman, prince, queen, so many just like one, like it is what it is kind of a situation. The huntsman, uh, what color are his eyes?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna go with green.
That is correct.
Oh!
Yeah. There's a piece where, and I was trying to pause on it here and find it for you when it just happens so fast. When he raises the dagger to stab her, and she turns around and he looks like he opens his eyes really wide, and when he does, they're like they're like bright
Oh,
green.
menacing. Yes.
So yeah, so you did it. You got that one. That one was
Yay.
good. Um, so they have the dwarves have a vault where they keep all their stuff, and it's so secure that they hang the key on the outside just in case you need to get
Right.
in. What word is above their vault?
What word? I know what you're talking about. Not sure what the word is. Um, is it diamonds or gems or something like that?
Is that what you think it is?
I don't know.
You ready?
Hmm. Vault.
Vault.
Oh no! Ah!
Trick question.
Oh, trick question.
Trick question. It's just the word vault. Like it's like so secretive. It's like here's
Yes.
the vault. Here's where we keep everything, and there's a
Here's the
key hanging
key.
right here. If you need anything, help yourself.
Oh
It's kind of
man.
like leaving the Halloween candy on the front porch in the bowl and says, "Please take one."
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
right.
when Snow White falls asleep, and I don't think you're going to get this one, but I can't
Okay.
put anything past you. When Snow White falls asleep, she has to fall asleep across three of their beds. Which three? Because
Oh.
they all have their names on them. Which three beds is she
Hmm.
falling asleep across?
I don't remember. It's gonna be okay. I'm gonna guess. Uh, Sleepy, Sneezy, and Grumpy.
Close. Dopey.
Dopey.
Yeah, it's Dopey, Sneezy, and Happy, which I would have thought that like
Oh,
Sleepy would have been, one of them
right.
that would have. Because I think the way the configuration they have is Dopey, Sneezy,
Hmm.
and Happy are on one side, and then on the other side
Uh-huh.
of the room it's Grumpy, Bashful, and Sleepy, and then Docs is
Oh,
like kind of on its
by
own.
itself.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There you go. Okay. And then she puts flowers on the table. They come in, they see the flowers on the table. Sneezy just breathes them in. What flowers are they? What type of flowers are they?
Oh gosh. Oh, I don't know. Pansies.
Goldenrod. And the only
Okay.
reason that is because he goes, "Oh, goldenrods," and then he smells them, and I'm like, that's
Why
such a
would you do
weird
that?
pull. So, that's a weird pull,
He
and
has
so are
hay fever.
gooseberries. Like, I didn't know that gooseberries were a thing, and I was like, gooseberry
Mm-hmm.
pie is just something you made up, and then I Google it, and I'm like, wow, okay, it's
Oh.
actually a thing that people like.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well,
so,
Sneezy does have hay fever, so that's probably why he they chose that.
so I'm just going to ask you one more, and it really doesn't have anything to do specifically with this movie, but with another review that you and I did in
Oh.
the TV show Once Upon a Time. There are dwarves, and they are the same names. They're the correct names here. But in this origin story, which was so bizarre with how they're born,
Hmm.
they're like hatched, like dwarves are hatched. There's no origin story here. I can't wait to see if the live action one that comes out this month has it. But there's no origin story for this. They
They
just
hatch
show
from
up. They're just
eggs.
there. What was Grumpy's original name before he got grumpy?
Oh,
It was on his pickaxe.
I know, and I can't remember it. I thought you were going to ask me about the one that was the spy, Sneaky or something. What was
Huh.
his name? Yeah, I don't know. What was it? Harold.
Dreamy.
Dreamy. Oh, that's right.
I thought that was such a weird thing in that the way
Hmm.
that they did a lot of things in Once Upon a Time were so strange, and maybe it's just because like we're used to them being a certain way,
Yep.
but yeah. Um, so one of the other things I want to talk about, just mentioned, is thank you for doing that, by the way. Congratulations, you almost
Ugh.
swept.
No.
You almost swept.
I'll do better
In
next
that
time.
on this month in March we are going to see Rachel Ziegler and Gal
Hmm.
Gadot in the live action Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which is interesting
Right.
because it feels like there's already been 100 of them. The trick is that Disney has never been the one to do them.
Right.
Um, so there was like the
Snow White and the
Sydney.
Huntsman.
There was Sydney White in the Seven Dwarfs,
Oh,
I think is what it was, which was
okay.
Amanda Bynes was in that. But
Oh,
like
right. Hmm.
but there was Mirror Mirror,
Yes.
so that one was the one with Julia Roberts. There
Hmm.
was Snow White and the Huntsman, which was kind
Right.
of a gritty, hardcore
Hmm.
version of it. Um, but as I was looking through, there were a lot of them that were listed, like there was like a Three Stooges version. There was this Kristen Cruack who was in Beauty and the
Oh,
Beast TV
right.
show, and also she was
Yes.
in Smallville.
Uh-huh.
So is the fairest of them all, which again she was so good for that role. Sydney
Yep.
White was the name of it. Snow White set in the modern day. And then I was looking through. There's a terror one with Sigourney Weaver called Snow White: A Tale of Terror. Mirror,
Oh my
Mirror.
gosh.
Uh, Mirror Mirror and then Snow White and the Huntsman. Is there one of those that you liked? Is there any of them that you hated?
Yeah, so at the time, because Snow White and the Huntsman and Mirror Mirror kind of came out simultaneously, it's like one of those things where, this movie studio does a baseball movie and this one's going to do a baseball movie to rival it. So I just remember thinking I liked Snow White and the Huntsman a little bit better. Um, but, you know, what's her name? Charlize Theron was a good evil queen in that one. And then it got kind of weird with the second one. Didn't really like that, the sequel to that. But I watched Mirror Mirror recently with my girls, and I actually liked it again. Like now I'm older and I'm looking at it. I don't really like Julia Roberts, so again, I'm glad that she was the evil queen. I know, hot take on that, but
Seriously.
she played herself very well in that movie. Let me just say.
Okay. All right. So we'll hold um thoughts on the new one coming out, but I do find it funny that
Okay.
everyone had panned the original Snow White before it came out, saying this is Walt's folly, it's going to be horrible, all of these things are bad. And this one has had a lot of controversy leading up to it, from
True.
back in the day where there was a rumor of who was going to be the actual dwarves to what they ended up with having now. So it will be interesting to see the reaction, but I think that overall the feeling is that it's not going to be great. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of the remakes are like that. So, especially with something that's this sacred to the company. I mean,
Yes.
so
That's
sacred that the Team Disney building is holding up,
the
held up
dwarfs.
by dwarves. Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. And I was going to say, Angela Lansbury told me in that documentary that this is one of the most important films of all time. Okay, and it's for all the reasons that we've already stated. It was ahead of its time. It was the landmark piece in a lot of ways, and I feel like that is what Disney Company is lacking now, and that they are trying to almost get away from that. And I feel sorry for them because that's what made them the most important children's, you know, entertainment producer. And I feel like if they had got, I don't know about these live action versions. I feel like we'll talk about Cinderella later. I know because that's, I think, the first live action that was like I really feel like true to the story and pretty good. But they've gotten subsequently worse, with the rare exception. So I don't know about this one. I feel like if they had gone back to the original intent of what Walt wanted, because again, this is from Walt's own brain, and if they had incorporated some of those older songs that had been already recorded, or some of his storyboard that he ended up cutting for time, but made it like a tribute to him, I think we would be talking in a different light about this. I really do.
Yeah. Okay. Um, all right, so let's talk a little bit about the parks stuff that has come off of this, because again, we're talking about how important this movie is, and it's like the pillar of all things, and yet there's not a ton, I feel like,
There's
of
not.
stuff in the parks. Like when he built Disneyland, he built Sleeping Beauty Castle to kind of coincide with the release of Sleeping Beauty. There's not, I don't know. It just feels like we're missing some opportunities with Snow White, but then again, maybe there's just too much Toy Story to be told that we can't go back. There wasn't
Exactly.
even like a direct to DVD version of this, and I felt like it was because it was so special. You didn't want to do like a straight to VHS, straight to DVD, Return of Jafar treatment of it.
Right.
But maybe they just didn't know how to do it, or maybe they did want to keep it like that. We have Snow White's Scary Adventures when I was a kid was happening at the Magic Kingdom. They took that away and they built Seven Dwarfs Mine Train roller coaster, and they took some of the animatronics and they put them in that little house at the end and the vultures at the top, and a couple of nods to the Snow White Scary Adventures. But it's a great attraction. I feel like I love that attraction.
Yep.
Most people do because the line's always so long and it's one of the paid lightning lanes. So that's a thing. Out in Disneyland, they have the Snow White's Grotto, which, I guess the
Yes.
legend is that these statues were a gift to Walt,
Right.
and that they're spread out the way they are so that Snow White looks like proportion wise, because I think if they're side by
She's
side,
bigger.
it's the same. Yeah. Um,
Yes.
they're kind of spread out proportion wise for that, but that's right next to Sleeping Beauty Castle, so that's kind of
Hmm.
a cool thing. And then of course they still have that attraction, but it's not Snow White's Scary Adventures. It's now called Snow White's Enchanted Wish,
Hmm.
at Disneyland in California. So at least they have
Yeah.
that there. And then at Epcot we have a meet and greet over in Germany, and they do the topiaries. And then you have the Magic Mirror is going to be kind of like the focal point of this new villain show um,
Right.
that's
Ooh,
coming in.
can I mention a fan conspiracy kind of theory about that?
Sure.
Okay, so this is what I saw. Don't have any idea if this is true or not. But in Wish, because I never saw Wish, but at the very end, he gets sucked into the mirror, correct? And
Yep.
then if you watch the mirror that she's looking at in the Snow White movie, it's almost like a prequel because there's a glimpse of the face of the, I don't know, you can call it a face or a mask or whatever, that she views, the spirit that she pulls forward. She says, spirit from where you dwell, mirror, mirror on the wall, that kind of thing. And he comes out, and that's what it looks like at the end of Wish. But it's like a very quick glimpse of it. So it could be him in the mirror.
Gotcha. Okay. I will love to see it. Although again, I think that a lot of people think that eventually they'll just move all the villain stuff to the villain's land that's going to open up in Magic Kingdom, and they will put the
Right.
Muppets in there. I know you have your own place where you'd like the Muppets to go. That's fine. Um,
Yes.
so so yeah. So then again, that's really kind of all. I mean, we see it as part of Phantasmic. We see it
Ah,
as part of
the wishing
of
well.
oh yeah, the Wishing Well.
Snow White's wishing well. Hmm.
True. But again, so small. Like I
Yeah.
want more. And the mine train's a big attraction. That's huge. But also, it's the Seven Dwarfs mine train.
Hmm.
We do see Snow White at the end dancing, and I think Dopey ripped her hand off, or she ripped his hand off, or something that happened that we saw
Yes.
recently. But yeah.
Well, I do
So
think that there needs to be more of a presence of her in the parks in general, because like they have, where they took out Mr. Toad and the Snow White Scary Adventures for Winnie the Pooh, they put in Princess Fairy Tale Hall in that area as well, and you have Rapunzel and Tiana, and that's great, and Elena. But where's Snow and Cinderella? So she's not in there. You can see her at Epcot, like you talked about at the Germany Pavilion, but you can also go to the Wilderness Lodge, and you can
right,
have the dinner at Artist Point, which is a wonderful dinner because you have the Evil Queen there.
yeah, no, that is a good point.
But it's
Um,
behind a paywall. You have to pay for it for sure.
true, 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 true. Um, so another thing that as we wrap this up, that again, we're talking about what an important movie this was, but some of these like historians are saying that part of the reason that Walt wanted to move in this direction, and we always like think of Uncle Walt, and he just did it for us, and it wasn't about the money and all that kind of stuff, is that he was finding a diminishing return on investment to doing shorts, that he was spending more and more money on shorts, and they were making less and less, and so that what they ended up doing was going to a movie like a full length so they could make more money, that it was really more of a money decision to go ahead and finally break into full length animated features rather than taking a loss. So,
Yeah,
as much as
absolutely.
we think it was just because it was his dream, it was his dream coupled with the fact that it was gonna it was the right move to do.
It was going to
And
launch everything else, and it built the studio like you said, with the dwarves holding up. That is because it was literally built on the money that they made from that film.
Well, and we say it all started with a mouse, but again, when you go back and you research this thing and you learn all of this, it really feels like it started with the Seven Dwarfs. Also, by the way, on our network, we have obviously the joke about. From Test Track where you're like, we'll put up 2, 5, and
7?
7. 7? Yeah,
Yeah.
7. There's a bit in here where she says something to the mirror about who's the fairest of them all, and he said, "Over the 7 jeweled hills beyond the 7th fall, in the cottage of the 7 dwarves." I'm like, that's a lot of sevens. That is a lot
Oh,
of sevens.
yes. And how did she get there? Because she's running through the forest. It didn't feel like it took her that long. The animals kind of brought her after that, over to but she went over 7 hills. That's a long way.
Well, she also fell down, like
How
almost
does
like
that work?
she fell down the rabbit hole. I don't know. Yeah, that was
Yes. That's a good
that was kind
point.
of strange. Yeah. And then she like kind of like skateboarded like Tarzan down the.
Yes.
No, she didn't do
So
that.
she's going into a different realm or something.
I guess so, yeah. Before we wrap up here, anything else that you wanted to talk about with this movie? I know I moved through it pretty fast, and we've taken up all of our time, but at the same time, I feel like it's the one that started it all, and so it feels like it was worth having this conversation about it. I mean, we certainly didn't talk about all the details of the movie, but it is a lot of gags. The basic storyline, is the same that we've seen and we know from Snow White. But is there anything else specifically about it you want to talk about before we move on to final thoughts?
I mean, I think it just goes back to what Walt said, and he said it's not just for adults, it's not just for kids, but everybody was a kid once. And maybe that something like this can evoke, sense of wonder and imagination and that kind of thing in the adult alike. And so I feel like that's what the Walt Disney Company needs to hold on to. They don't need to just, kind of cater to the Instagram crowd, but those, the nostalgia of it all, and honor their heritage, honor the one that started everything. So hopefully, here's hoping to some good things in the future.
Yes, for sure. All right. So thank you guys for joining us tonight. Before we get to final thoughts, I do want to mention that we've got some stuff coming up on Deep in the Plus. We did Night at the Museum last week with Desi, and we're doing Snow White tonight. Next week is our pre-St. Patrick's Day celebration with Patrick himself, and we're going to be talking about 2 episodes of the Disney Afternoon that talk about St. Patrick's Day. It's the DuckTales and I believe Rescue Rangers. And then on March 19th, Desi will be doing Big, the Tom Hanks movie, and then on March 26th, the original Pinocchio is turning 70 this year. So Ron, our movie historian, if you will, not that you aren't, Stephanie, but will be
Oh,
coming on to talk about Pinocchio. So hopefully you guys will go back, watch some of those, or at least come and hang out with us while we're talking about them. Again, not a lot of spoilers on these. There's not a lot of we're not talking about Daredevil yet, Born Again, or anything you had to watch. A
right.
lot of these movies are things you probably should have seen already, and hopefully you can come and share some time with us and talk about it. And don't forget this Sunday night at 9 p.m. Park Center. We do Park Center every Sunday night at 9 p.m. We hope you, or most Sunday nights at 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Hopefully you guys will be able to join us for that. That would be great. But Stephanie, now is the time. Now is the best time.
Time of your life.
Yes, exactly. We've talked about this classic movie, what it meant to the company, Walt, his folly, his success, Snow, the Seven Dwarfs. But I gotta ask, would you in 2025? Would you recommend this movie?
Yes, I would. And it's not just because it's the first one, although that's a good reason to stand alone in and of itself. But when you watch this, you appreciate the beauty and the artistry of it. It's like what our review on Sleeping Beauty, and how beautiful the scenes are, art in and of themselves. This is what this reminds me of too. And how cute, and yes, the gags with the Seven Dwarfs, but it really is endearing and charming. And absolutely, it is something that holds your attention. It'll hold a 2-year-old. My 2-year old is a testament to this. She will sit there and watch the entire movie and get excited when the prince comes. And so yes, I definitely recommend.
Awesome. Well, I would too, because of not only the movie itself, but its importance to the company. Obviously, and we watched it, and then we went back and watched a lot of the making of, the behind the scenes, what led to it, all of the drama that led up to this, and how important it was. And if you think about like that scene with Walt smiling ear to ear with that Academy Award with the little ones and Shirley Temple, and isn't it swell, Mr. Disney, or whatever she said. This movie is history. It's the Citizen Kane of animation, I feel like. And, I don't think you can go wrong with watching this in any way if you've never seen it before, or even if you've seen it. And I think that because, again, with Disney, we see clips all of our lives, especially as Disney Parks fans. We see clips of everything to the point where it's like, do you remember the last time you actually sat down and watched one of these movies, end to end? And it's kind of like during COVID, everybody rewatched all of the Marvel movies, or found the
Yes,
Marvel movies and rewatched them. Why not go back and watch all 61 full-length animated features? Do
exactly.
that.
Binge them all.
Binge them all. But you got to start with Snow. You got to start at the
Right.
beginning.
In order.
Otherwise, you don't get it when you watch Ralph Breaks the Internet and you see Snow White in there. You're like, who is that? I've never seen her before.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate you. Again, hopefully you'll join us for Park Center on Sunday night. But if not, we will join us next Wednesday night for another Deep in the Plus. Thank you guys so much. And Stephanie, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate you being here on review number 250.
Yay!
Before I let you go, of all the things you've reviewed so far for us on Deep in the Plus, which is your favorite review?
Oh, um, well, I really love Sleeping Beauty because she's my favorite princess, obviously. But I really liked doing Chronicles of Narnia. I really did.
Awesome. Okay. I was just looking. I think you've done 11 reviews.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
shocking.
It's either 10 or 11 with this one.
Okay.
It's either 10 or 11, but we'll make
Awesome.
sure that the record is set straight. But thank you so much again for joining us, for joining me and doing this movie. It means a lot, so I appreciate it. Have a great night,
Thank
everybody,
you.
and we'll see you next time.